afternoon, everyone. Today, my name is Aaron Brown, and before I begin, I wanted to just thank the pastor for allowing me to come and speak and give some information today on what I do and some of the things that I provide and some of the services that I offer. Just before I begin, I want to give a little brief background on myself and let you know why I think I'm at least a little bit qualified to tell you about some of the things I'm about to discuss today. Like I said, my name is Aaron Brown. I was born and raised right here in Jacksonville, Florida. I attended Arlington Country Day High School. From there, I matriculated to University of Central Florida, where I studied pre-law, political science, and legal studies. Very active in the community while I was in Orlando, very active in my school as well, affiliated with the fraternal organization as well. From there, I matriculated literally a week later to law school at Florida A&M. A lot of people don't know that Florida A&M Law School has a satellite campus, which is in Orlando, so it allowed me to stay in Orlando and pursue my Juris Doctor degree and get my law degree. I ended up taking the bar after I completed law school, passed my first time, and I began working at a local firm here in Jacksonville. Currently, I started my own solo practitioner. I'm working on my own right now. And that's just a little bit about me. Just want to give you a little brief background about myself. Today, what I wanted to discuss to you, and something I think is very important, and I think that's something very relevant to today's day and age, is the Fourth Amendment. Now, I don't know if any of you recall what the Fourth Amendment is. I know before I went to law school, I couldn't quote it. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew it was part of the Constitution. But today I want to give you a little bit more insight and how important it is for you to understand and realize how vital your Fourth Amendment rights are and how important it is for you to know and be cognizant of what they are. So today what I want to do is I want to read to you the Fourth Amendment. Now it's broken down into two parts. And some of this might be a little dense, but I'm going to break it down really simple. And I'm going to give examples so it's really concise and understandable. So like I said, the Fourth Amendment is broken down into two parts. And the first part is the right of the people to be secure in the persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Now that's the first part of the Fourth Amendment. There's a second part that talks about warrants. And we're not going to get into warrants today. That's kind of like a subcategory. It's very relevant. And if I get an opportunity to come again, I'll be more than happy to discuss and give some information about warrants, warrantless searches, and whatnot. But that's the Fourth Amendment. And that's what our founding fathers, they drafted this document, and that's what they put together. Ultimately, those words were put in place to protect two fundamental liberties. One, your right to privacy. And secondly, your freedom from arbitrary invasions. Now, what does that mean? That's pretty simple, plain and simple. Your right to privacy, the right to have your own bag, your right to have your own house. And the freedom from arbitrary invasions, that's the right from the police to come into your house at any given time and to say, well, we think there's something in there. So the founding fathers wanted to protect us from that liberty. So from that, let's get into what does it protect. Now, I read to you the Constitution, and we said it protects persons, houses, papers, and effects. But what does that mean? Those are very, very broad categories and terms. So I want to just give you a few examples so you know specifically what your Constitution protects you against. Let's start with persons. So we know about clothes. Your clothes, that would be an extension of you. So that would be included in your persons. My wallet, something on me, my t-shirt, anything that I put in my garments, that's a part of my persons. That's an extension of you. Now here's a difficult one. What about bodily fluids? Your blood, your spit, your DNA. That also is included and inclusive of your persons. So that is also private. That's something that's protected by the Fourth Amendment. So be cognizant of that. Now let's go to houses. Now this seems seemingly easy. Okay, we know our house, of course, is included under the context of the Fourth Amendment. Our apartment as well. What about an RV, a mobile home, something like that? Well, that kind of goes twofold. If it's stationary, of course, it's included under the context of the Fourth Amendment, and we do have Fourth Amendment protection from governmental intrusion. But if that RV is mobile, then you have a lesser threshold of protection because it's mobile and things are visible from the outside. But if it's a stationary RV, you're going to have a lot more protection. So that's that. Now, the two things left we have to talk about is papers and effects. Papers is another difficult topic. Books, diaries, those things are private. Those things are protected under the Fourth Amendment. But something that may not be private is your email or even some text messages that you send from a friend to another friend. But why is that? Because you're sending that communication from over the airways from one computer to the next or from one phone to the next. You can't expect too much privacy from information that you're sending from one person to the next. So that's why information that you send in a text message, over the phone, via the internet, is not going to give you too much protection as far as the Fourth Amendment. Now lastly, what about effects? Now that sounds like something Midwestern, your effects, but it's also very vital. Those are things like your iPod, your wallet, your possessions, things that you buy. Those are your effects, and they are also protected under the context of the Fourth Amendment. So recap, we talked about the text of the Constitution. We just briefly talked about what it protects, persons, houses, papers, and effects. Now what we're going to talk about is who it protects. who does the Constitution protect? Who does specifically the Fourth Amendment protect? Does it protect kids under 18? Does it protect adults? Does it protect naturalized aliens? It protects all of them. The Constitution is very broad and it's very inclusive, and the Founding Fathers drafted this document to protect a lot of individuals. You can be 5 years old, you can be 21 years old, you can be 99. You're governed by the Fourth Amendment and you're offered that protection. So I want all of you to be cognizant of that. A lot of individuals don't think, a lot of individuals who are nationalized or have been naturalized, and they don't understand that they have the Fourth Amendment protection. So that's something that you need to be cognizant of. And these protection, this umbrella of protection is also being offered to you. Okay, now let's dive into what does the Fourth Amendment protect us from. We talked about the text of the Constitution. We talked about what it protects: persons, houses, papers, effects. We got examples of what that is. We know now who it protects. Everyone, basically. Everyone in this room, I guarantee, was protected by the Fourth Amendment. Now let's talk about what does it specifically protect us from. Well, the Fourth Amendment tells us in the text it protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. Now that's the key word: unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, to determine what's an unreasonable search or seizure, courts are going to look to balance two things. One, your individual liberty, my rights, my privacy, versus the right to have an ordered society. Now, what does that mean? I can only give it a better example is by telling you the right to have your own private stuff. This is my knapsack, my book bag. I take this where I go. When I go to work, when I go to school, this is mine. I purchased it. I have a right to keep the things in here private. You have no right to know what's in here. The police have no right to know what's in here. But say I'm in middle school and I carry this knapsack to school, but before I went to school, I took a gun that I found in the street and put it in my bag. Now we're going to balance the right to have an ordered society. Do we think that the principals, the administrators, the facilitators of that school have a right to keep guns out of the school? Absolutely. The right to keep an ordered society is going to weigh a little bit more heavier than my individual rights. Now that's what we're protecting against. Now there would be no unreasonable search and seizure if an individual has a gun in their bag and they know that they have a gun in their bag. That's what we're going to balance here. That's what the government, and that's what practitioners such as myself, judges, argue on a daily basis by determining what is an unreasonable search and seizure. So, recap. We talked about the text of the Constitution. We talked about what it protects. We talked about who it protects. Now we know what it protects us from. Now we know that we need to talk about what is a search, what is a seizure. A search is when you have an expectation of privacy in something and it's been violated. A seizure is when you have a possessory interest in something and it's been taken away from you. For an example, my book bag. If a governmental entity comes and takes my book bag away from me, then a search and a seizure has been occurred. Now it needs to be important that you understand that it has to be a governmental entity. A private entity does not work. For instance, loss prevention at Sears is not a governmental entity. If they go in your bag and take something from you, you're not protected by the constructs of the Fourth Amendment. However, if the FBI, the CIA, or even the police take your stuff and you have a claim under the Fourth Amendment, then you will be protected as far as the Fourth Amendment construct concerned. So be cognizant. A lot of individuals talk to me on a day-to-day and say, well, you know, loss prevention kind of went through my stuff and they were searching for stuff. Do I have a Fourth Amendment claim? No, you don't, because that's not a governmental entity and you're not protected against those type of invasions. But what you are protected against is when you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in something and it's been violated by a governmental entity. So now let's move on to what is a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now that too is a two-part test. There's a subjective and then there's an objective. Subjective meaning I have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the things that I purchase, the things that I have. This knapsack of mine, it might not be much to you, but it's a lot to me. I've had it for a long time. I have a reasonable expectation of privacy of the contents in this bag. Now objectively, will society as a whole take and understand that the concept that things in this bag should be private to me and kept to myself? That's the objective analysis of the thing. And that's what we argue on a day-to-day basis, determine whether or not subjective versus objective. Now let's put an example to that if that's a little dense. For instance, say my book bag is a mesh book bag, and it's one of those bags you take to the gym and you can see through it. First part of the test, subjective. Do I have a subjective belief that this is my contents and these things should be protected against anybody looking and intruding in that stuff? Absolutely. Objectively, would society, a large scale as a whole, believe that the contents of this should be private? Absolutely not. Why is that? Because it's a mesh book bag. There's no expectation of privacy of something that's in plain view, of something that you can see through, of something that is visible to the outside with eye-to-eye contact easily. So that too is something that plays in a role when courts and practitioners and judges sit down and argue as far as, was there really an expectation of privacy? Would society as a whole really accept this to be something that is protected, that something as a whole we would believe that there was an expectation of privacy? So let's recap. We talked about the text of the Constitution. We read it. We know there's two parts: searches and seizures and warrants. We talked about who it protects. We talked about what it protects against: persons, houses, papers, and effects. We gave prime examples of what those things are. We know now what we're protected against. We also talked about what it protects against: unreasonable searches and seizures. We talked about we talked about the two-part test in determining reasonable expectation of privacy: subjective, my stuff; objective, society as a whole believes that this also should be private. Now, let's get into the meat real quick and just kind of wrap things up by saying, what role do you play? Now, the only way I can really explain this is by giving an example, and this is an example, it's a personal example, so I'm not gonna give the name, I'm gonna give a fictitious name because that will kind of be messed up. So I'm gonna give an example of my friend named Chris. Chris is a rapper in Orlando, and he was traveling to Jacksonville to come visit me. We're gonna go kick it, we're gonna go to the club. And it was broad daylight, he was coming during the day, he was gonna come to a barbecue at my family's house. But before Chris got on the road, he had 2 grams or 5 grams of marijuana, and he put in his glove compartment. Sealed it up, no deal, no problem. He wasn't high, his eyes weren't glassy, he had not smoked that entire day. He's a clean-cut African-American male. He gets on the highway, midday, halfway through on I-4, he gets pulled over. Cop comes up to him and says, "Hey, it looked like you were kind of swerving a little bit, your taillights looked like they were dimming in and out. I just wanted to check and see if everything's all right." Chris says everything is fine. Officer asks for his license and registration, comes back a few minutes later and says, "Hey, here you go, do you mind if I search your car?" That's the only thing that he said to him. Chris froze. He didn't quite understand, and he didn't quite have the time to think, what are my rights? Can I do this? Should I give him the permission to search through my car? He has a badge of authority. I guess I have to. Almost instantly, Chris, as do millions of America on a day-to-day basis, said, "Sure, I guess." And one of the first places that the officer searched was his glove compartment, and he did find that marijuana, and he was incarcerated that day. So now what does that mean to you? Does that mean that every time you get pulled over, you tell a cop no? Absolutely not. Am I telling you to be disrespectful to police officers? Absolutely not. I would never do that. But what I am telling you is that you do have rights, and that you do have the authority to not give consent. When Chris said, "I don't know, I guess," he gave consent to have his entire body of his car searched. And I just want to let you know, there's a few things that I want to give to you and explain to you in regards to that situation. First and foremost, police officers can pull you over or stop you as long as they have a reasonable suspicion or probable cause. Now that there is a whole another day's worth of analysis and understanding of what those things mean. But basically, as long as they stopped you for a legitimate purpose, taillight, they ran your tags or anything like that, they pretty much are open to ask you any question when they pull you over. Secondly, once they stop you, like I said, they're permitted to ask you anything they want to. They can ask to go through your bags. They can ask you to go through your trunk or whatnot. So don't think that they're violating you by asking you. Thirdly, they can ask to search you even if they stop you for an unrelated reason. For instance, they stopped Chris for his tag light or for his tail light, but they asked to search his car. Totally unrelated, but it was totally legitimate. Now be aware, you have the right to not give consent in that search. Now what does that mean? If you say, for instance, Chris said, "No, I don't want to give a search. I don't want to do that." One of the things could have happened, Chris could have been let go that instance. The officers could have said, "Thank you, Chris, here's your license, registration, have a good day." Another thing that could have happened, Chris could have been detained. Chris could have been held. They could have brought the dogs in and searched the vehicle. But what does that weigh to? That weighs to the fact of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonableness. Was he detained for an unreasonable amount of time? Was he detained unreasonably? How were the procedures when they held him? Did they give him his Miranda rights? Did they inform him why they were detaining him? And then that'll go to the Fourth Amendment analysis, and that's when he could call an attorney and say, "Hey, this is the instances, this is the facts, these are what happened. Do I have an argument? Do I have a claim?" And the answer might be possibly yes. And you could almost, if they did find any evidence that day, file a motion to suppress and get that evidence taken out of any proceeding that would be brought against you. So let me wrap things up and sum things up. We talked about the text of the Constitution today. We know now that there's two parts of the Fourth Amendment. There's a search and seizure part, and then there's a warrant part. We talked about what it protects: persons, houses, papers, and effects. We also talked about who it protects: everybody in this room and probably everybody watching on YouTube. We talked about what it protects against, unreasonable searches and seizures, and we know it's unreasonable. We talked about the expectation of privacy, and that there's two parts to that. My expectation of privacy, and one that society as a whole is going to want to believe is an expectation of privacy. Then we also gave an example of what role do we play? What rights do we have in terms of the Fourth Amendment? So what I want to do basically is, in closing, tell you that the purpose of the Fourth Amendment is to uphold the privacy and the security of individual persons against subjective invasions by the government and its officials. When the government violates an individual's expectation of privacies, then an unlawful search has occurred, and you may have a claim, and you might need to consult an attorney. Once again, thank you for the time. I would be glad to take any questions.
Well, first of all, I thought I was smart. This joker threw out some words that I haven't heard in decades. Let's give him a round of applause. And I know some of you saying, well, I haven't broken the law. I didn't break the law. Sometimes you may be guilty by association. And sometimes you may incriminate yourself and not even know it. And I know incriminate may seem harsh, but you may put yourself in a uncomfortable predicament and not even know it. So knowledge is very powerful and is very influential. So everything that you shared on was very relevant. My freshman year of college, I went to Savannah State University.
Okay.
My roommates, they wanted to go to Tybee Island, which is like right outside of Savannah, right? And they wanted to go out to the beach.
Okay.
On the way out there, the speed limit's 45. I was going 45. So I get pulled over by the police, and my roommate says, OS. And I'm saying, why are you cussing me? What's the problem? He said, man, I got this dime bag on me.
Right.
So I said, bro, you're going to have to eat that.
Right.
Eat the marijuana. You got to eat that.
Right.
Because I ain't about to get locked up for this foolishness.
Right, absolutely.
So basically, that right there could have messed up my college career.
Absolutely.
It could have messed up my employment.
Absolutely.
It could have messed up my ministry. There's so many things that could have happened at 18 that could have messed me up for the rest of my life. So the information that you share with us today, it doesn't just benefit us from a reactive standpoint, it also works as a prevention measure as well.
Absolutely.
Because as human beings, we all make mistakes. We all make decisions that we're not that proud of. And to be honest with you, if everybody who did something wrong went straight to prison, we'll all be locked up.
Right.
So therefore, we thank God for His grace. And I know that you didn't talk about anything biblical per se, but I'm going to tie it in.
Okay, please do.
Because it's about transformation. Because what we don't know can hurt us, and it will hurt us. So the information that you shared helped share light when we talk about search and seizure and Fourth Amendments. Now, I do want to ask you this question.
Sure.
And it may be for somebody in this room or someone who may be watching by television. Say they had a couple of drinks. They didn't get drunk, but they may have had a couple of drinks and they get pulled over.
Right.
You said bodily fluid.
Right.
Now, is a breathalyzer test, do I have the right not to submit my breath?
Absolutely. You do have the right. However, within the context of that, they have a legitimate reason to detain you. Now they know, since you are not consenting to the search or the breathalyzer, and the fact of the matter is they stopped you for some erratic behavior, maybe on the road, maybe you swerved, maybe you ran through a stoplight or whatnot. So they have the right now to detain you. And they can use that fact against you later on. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not swerving, and I didn't run a red light, and
a DUI checkpoint, but I just pull every car up.
Well, that's a whole nother analysis. A sobriety checkpoint is permissible in the context of the Fourth Amendment because it's systematic. They're not just picking out you and then him because he's black or whatnot. It's systematic, and they can only detain you for as long as it is necessary to run necessary light plates, license, registrations, and things like that. It can't be overly intrusive. If it is, then it's violative of the Fourth Amendment.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe not for you, but for somebody you may know. Because listen, this type of information, bringing in Leah Thomas, Dr. Juan, Attorney Aaron Brown, we don't get a chance to talk to these type of people every day. And like I said, I mean, there may be a question that you may have, or you may know someone that's about to go through some very serious charges or some very serious offense. Not saying that Mr. Brown will have all the answers right away, but this is a great opportunity for you to ask that question and maybe gain some valuable insight. Because I know when somebody looks at this on television, they're probably going to wish they were here. From family members. One of the things the first time I really wanted to kind of pursue law school was when my father had a stroke. He worked 18 years, Aaron.
Wow.
And he was also a military vet. He worked his whole life, and he actually had to hire an attorney to get Social Security disability. He couldn't use the left side of his body, but they said because his mind wasn't affected, which is a lie, but they said because his mind wasn't affected, he's still employable, even though he couldn't walk like he used to. He was used to doing physical labor.
Right.
That's what he did in the military. That's what he did for occupation. So he had to wait 3 years, and he had to submit 3 times before he could qualify for $800 a month.
Wow.
I mean, now, is that an area of law that you work on, or is that an area of law that you would be able to refer someone out to? I'm just asking hypothetically.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm fairly new practitioner, but there's nothing out there that I couldn't research on and become versed on. I'm pretty knowledgeable as far as the other practitioners in the area, so if it's nothing I couldn't do, I definitely knew people that I refer to.